How's everyone doing this week? Great, not so great. I've been a little bit stressed out at work, but I'm very happy because I published my poetry book. So I thought this week I would do a video about poetry, specifically why poetry. Not only why I choose to write it, but why you should potentially try and write it, and why you should at least give it a shot reading it. First of all, I just want to start off by talking a little bit about my book. It's called A Strange Malady. It is 26 poems in various styles. Some of them rhyme, some of them don't. We can talk about a bunch of different topics. It's really kind of runs the gamut of emotions. So why poetry? Well, I've actually pretty much always enjoyed it. I didn't think I did when I was younger until I took an AP English class in high school. In this class, we read a lot of poetry, classic stuff, and some newer stuff too. And I was actually struck by the amount of political discourse in some of the newer stuff that, we hadn't focused on in our other English classes. We'd only talked pretty much about Shakespeare and classic stuff that they have you read in class, and you dissect it and talk about symbolism and whatnot. And once we started getting into some of the civil rights stuff, it blew my mind at how wonderful and expressive and just electrifying it can be. I had never gotten chills reading anything until I read some stuff by Langston Hughes, actually. So anyways, that's a little bit of background of how I got into poetry. I started writing it shortly after I was in college. For an English class, I wrote some poetry and got some positive feedback from the professor. So every now and then after that, I attempted to write some, and I guess over the years, I just sort of got a collection, and that's what turned into my collection of 26 poems. The oldest poem in that collection I wrote when I was 18, and the newest, maybe a month ago. So kind of spans many years in my life. Another reason I enjoy poetry, some of you may not know, but I have a background in linguistics. I did my first undergraduate degree in graphic comm and languages, and then did a master's degree in linguistics. And I've always enjoyed the melody and the syntax and flexibility of language, particularly English. I studied a lot of German, and so I love German poetry as well. But English is special in the way that you can really be flexible with the language and words and their meanings and the imagery, the rhyme, and the melody of it. If you like music or studying language in general, kind of puzzles with language, finding words that fit, finding things that fit the rhythm that still get the point across of what you want to say, you might like writing poetry. One thing that I think a lot of people immediately think of if they're not into poetry is, isn't it dead? Like starving poet, starving artist sort of thing. They sort of think of Shakespeare and maybe the beatniks in the 60s, beat poetry with the snapping and the dim lighting and all that bullshit that you see in movies, kind of mocking that sort of thing. I think that's what a lot of people who maybe don't seek out poetry think of when someone says that, oh, I'm a poet or I write poetry. People have their ideas of what it means and what it is, and they're also looking at a very, very thin sliver of what is out there. There's actually a thriving community of poets on Instagram, of all places. You would think it would be kind of more of a visual thing, and the poets do use visual arrangement of words, and they have for a long time. But it's interesting at how text comes across so well on Instagram. There's a ton of absolutely incredibly talented people writing poetry frequently. Sometimes they do live streaming of like readings and things like that. You can really get into it that way without actually leaving your house and stepping into an atmosphere that you might not be familiar with. If you like flash fiction and short stories, microfiction at all, you probably would also like poetry. Now, some of it's written in kind of an obscure way that's difficult to decipher and figure out, and you might not be into that sort of poetry, but there's plenty out there that isn't. It's more written like prose. And in my book, there's a couple that are written more in that style. I've broken them down into more of a visual line arrangement so that it reads a little bit more smoothly. Didn't rhyme it. There's really no meter. It's just kind of blank verse or prose. And there's lots of stuff like that out there. You can sit down and read it in a few minutes. You might not get everything out of it that you want to get out of it, or you might. It just kind of depends on how you choose to read, who you choose to read. But it's a beautiful, bite-sized look into someone's world. It tells a story, but in a completely different way than a flash fiction or short story otherwise would. Probably my favorite reason to get into poetry is the way that it affects the chemistry and physiological responses that you get. It is a window into a highly emotional area of your brain. When you read poetry, studies have shown that it lights up areas associated with highly volatile emotional memories that you might have. Now, if it's angry or sad poetry, you might hear people say things like trigger warning, or warning there might be violence or explicit content or something in this. And they do that because people who have been through these things have that area of their brain reactivated when they read something that really resonates with them and describes feelings that they had very vividly and in a way that maybe they couldn't have put into words before, but this fits what they were thinking. It's a physiological response, it's arousal, it's emotion. It's very associated with kind of a primal core as human beings. I think that one of the most beautiful things about reading poetry is that you can really get into the mind of someone else, particularly someone who's been through things that you've never been through, and it can activate that empathetic response that so many people honestly seem to lack nowadays. And that's a different rant. It's not for this video, but I think that empathy is important, and especially as writers, if not just for your own personal growth, learning about other characters' experiences and how their worldview shapes the way that they interact with other people, the words they choose to use, the way that they write, the way that they pour their emotions out for you to read. This is like the most honest, unedited form of telling someone your darkest parts of yourself, or the most intimate parts of yourself that you might not be able to say if you weren't putting them into words like this. So another reason I think it's important to read poetry is to understand people, or to gain a better understanding or a better perspective of people who are not like you. Seek out poets that fit into these communities and thrive within these communities, and read what they have to say and understand what they're going through. It's something that you can read about in an intellectual textbook way, but you're never going to activate that part of your brain that resonates and empathizes in the same way that you would if you read their emotions basically channeled onto a page. Another reason that I think people should at least try to write poetry, because it tests your vocabulary and your ability to be flexible and creative with words in a way that novel writing, short story writing, flash fiction writing doesn't typically allow if you follow the kind of classic rules for writing. Increases your breadth of talent, understanding, and artistic ability when you study different forms of art, even if it's not your favorite, even if it's not what you're going to be doing yourself long term, even if it's not really something you want to dabble in. It's worth it just to see, just to have a glimpse of what else is out there and how beautiful and wonderful creativity can truly be. If you're a songwriter, you probably understand what I mean. You need to use different creative modalities to get your point across in a way that's both aesthetically pleasing or communicates what you want to say in both melody and lyrics. I mean, that's a completely different area of talent as well, because not everyone has a musical brain. They might have a brain for rhythm and play with syntax and things like that, but they might not have an area that really thrives on melody, and you do. So songwriting is a form of poetry. The civil rights movement, I talked about women's rights, and poetry and art absolutely drove those movements forward. They were complete catalysts for getting the word out there and talking about the emotions behind it and the feelings of injustice and just rage and desire for change. That's still going on. there are contemporary, especially from the Black community, there are contemporary voices talking about a variety of injustices that you probably heard about, probably read about, and reading people's experiences with what's going on in the current political climate is one way that you can open up to looking at what people are actually doing to promote change, the movements that are, occurring and wanting to be the catalyst for change and trying to motivate people and venting their frustrations with what's going on. It's totally relevant to your writing today. Whether you're writing anything that's political or not, applying what's going on in today's world to your writing, fiction, nonfiction, essays, poetry, songwriting, whatever. It's a great example of what people are doing and how passionate they are about what they believe in, how they stand up for what they believe in. That's another reason why when people say that poetry is dead, it's absolutely not. They teach the classics in English literature, like I said, but when you look at the newer stuff for the last 50 years, and then I think they also need to focus on what's going on now, what people are saying now with the internet. People are creating their own content at volumes we have never seen in the past. We have access to so much art and so many different perspectives that I don't understand why people wouldn't be interested in reading about it personally. Okay, so I gave you a few reasons why you should like poetry, why you should try reading poetry, perhaps even try writing it, but at least to appreciate what's out there. My book is available on Amazon if you're interested in reading my poetry. That's about all I have to say about that for now. I hope that you guys found it at least a little bit interesting. I know I ramble a lot, I talk a lot about kind of the same things. So I appreciate if you've made it to the end of the video. Have an absolutely wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Bye.